about user story mapping for creating vision and stakeholder alignment. Myself, I'm Ashish Tripathi. I'm Associate Director of Product. I've been in product for more than 15 years. And, I'm really excited to start talking about user story mapping with you. And Michelle, you want to give a little intro as well?
Yeah, I'm Michel. I'm a product manager at the team in Annalect. We focus on building tools in the ad tech, MarTech space.
All right. Yeah, so let's jump into it. So I'm going to start out here with a quote. Know the ledge to where your heart is, or fall off into the eternal hell that is uncharted. It is from the Wu-Tang Clan, from the song Sunshine, and the album is Wu-Tang Forever. I am a fan of the Wu-Tang Clan. Obviously, I don't condone the violence and derogatory language towards women as well as the drug use. However, it came out at a time when I was ready for that kind of music and had a lot of teenage angst, and it really spoke to me. So that's one of the reasons why I use this quote here. But there are two other reasons why I used the Wu-Tang Clan here is because they actually are very good marketers, and their product is their music. And they do a lot of things that I think are useful for product managers. One, they brought to the market something that wasn't available at the time. So they really saw a gap in the market, which was that in the time of that they came out, a lot of hip hop was around one MC. Nas was very popular in New York and specifically, and they actually brought many MCs and one DJ, which was kind of a spot that was missing, that was there at the beginning of hip hop uh, with Furious Five and other old artists, but it was kind of missing at the time when the Wu-Tang Clan came out. So they're very good at providing what's available, as well as what we can take away as product managers. They're also very good at telling you what is coming up. So they would often feature the artists that would be coming up with solo albums as well, and would tell you that these things are coming out and going to be available, as well as put in a very good view of what you're going to get. So I knew that in any Wu-Tang song, I'm going to hear kung fu samples, and that's what I expected from the product, and they would always deliver on that. So the third reason that I actually selected the Wu-Tang Clan, so not only are they good marketers and am I a fan, but is that they actually talk about location quite a lot, and this might be a product of being in New York, but they talk about Staten Island and specific places in New York that would be referenced, as well as some of the members are from Brooklyn. And so this is very pivotal in their music. And as you can see from the quote, it's very when you're in New York and as you're going through, it's very important to know where you are and how you are and where you're going to be going. So this is one of the reasons why they're a popular hip hop group here in America, is that I think they speak to kind of some of the directional pieces that are necessary when going through. So let's go see what we got for the survey results. So just real quick, I'm going to bring up the survey results and let's present this. So what do we got here? So we've got some results, and it looks like getting alignment with stakeholders is one of the topics, and the other is understanding what should be released and when it should be released. Now, part of the reason we were going on this is as we go through user story mapping, these are three things that I believe user story mapping can help solve. And uh, being able to survey the group here helps us to understand, and I can focus on certain things here and certain topics that are in here more as we go through the presentation. So I'm really glad that you guys saw answered this survey, and that we'll be able to leverage this as we go through the presentation to kind of lead the discussion into that direction. So it's good to know understanding should be released and when it should be released. That's going to be something that we cover, in pretty great detail. Michel is going to go over it with a real life example. So I'm glad we saw that, and we'll get that there. And I'll touch on some of the getting alignment with stakeholder as we go through. Okay, great. So let's go back here. So thank you all for filling that out. And so the next piece is let's look at the history of some pieces here. We're going to look at the history of user stories. So where did really user stories come from? And what makes the aspects of a good user story? So user stories really started in the 1990s and 1998 with extreme programming. They started with Kent Black, who was, kind of the granddaddy or godfather of Agile Manifesto. He was one of the signers of the Agile Manifesto, one of the starters for extreme programming for sure. And part of the reason that it's important to understand the history is that Kent Black, had use cases and requirements, and they didn't want it to be the same kind of thing when going into extreme programming and the way that they're going. So part of it is that the inspiration for a user story came into that he was talking to a user and he wanted to know how to put in the zip code, or he wanted to be able to put the zip code in and automatically have the state selected. So that's really kind of the impetus to start it. And the other thing that I like that came out of the definition of user story from is that one of the definitions is that a user story is an invitation to a conversation. And I have some of the mentors that I have gone through that as well and shared that with me. And I think that that's very important as well for product managers, is to understand that user stories aren't something that you define in a vacuum. They're really there to help facilitate the conversation and start going. So what makes a good user story? And so, one of the things that comes out is that a lot of the times my wife still doesn't know what I necessarily do as a product manager, even though we've been married for a long time, as long as I've been a product manager. And I explained to her kind of what it is, but I think it really is that we are storytellers. And so we're telling people how to do things. So, what makes a good story in general are these three things that makes a good user story. It's to know who it is, what they do, what they want to do, and why it's important. So, in this case, if we're talking about myself, that my wife doesn't know about product management, that I like Wu-Tang Clan, I want to convey to her, what is it that I do, and it really is storytelling. And the reason it's important is because we convey the story to all sorts of stakeholders as well as developers to help them understand what to do and how to do it when you're getting there. So that's part of the reason why, to give that context and the detail about what it is we're trying to accomplish as product managers and as the product development team. The next part is about maps. So the reason we're going to the history of maps, we have an image here of one of the oldest maps that was around. This is the Imago Mundi, and it's of Babylon, ancient Babylon, with Babylon in the center and places around Babylon in a sand sea that are available around the area and around Babylon. So, the word actually comes from, the history of the word map actually comes from mappe mundi, and it's Latin for mappe is cloth, and then mundi is of the world. And so when, there was kind of got shortened into mappe in French, and then, became map. And that's really kind of where we get the word map. But looking at it as a product manager, I'm always worried about roadmaps in general, and then, with user story mapping as well, get into maps. So what are really good aspects of a map? And I think everyone can tell this from using Google Maps or your iPhone Maps application. There's really three main things you want to know. You want to know where are you going, and what are the routes. If one of those things is missing from Google Maps, then you're basically stuck and you're angry with the product because you don't have those three things. So it's important to understand those three things as part of what it is that you're trying to accomplish when you're getting into a map. So what does this all mean? So we're going to take these two things and put them together. So we're going to take user stories that you all should be familiar with in your product management work, and we're going to take mapping and we're going to put them together so that we have a visual representation of a map and of the product so that it helps us understand where we're going. So this is a little bit meta, but this is my user story map for this presentation. So we actually had the kind of the user activities, which are the three parts of the presentation that we're going through. There's user tasks. So there's certain things that I wanted to go through as we were going through the presentation. So we had the icebreaker, definitions. We're getting into user story mapping right now. We're going to be talking about releases, real world examples, and then we're going to conclude. So these are all the little user tasks that I want to go through as, you as the user who are listening to the presentation are going through. So I wanted to have now the priority of the things that I wanted to do. So, these are kind of the things that you always do in a presentation. Now I'm going into specifically how do I want to change and make the presentation better, right? So the first thing I want to do is I wanted to have a survey and I wanted to have Wu-Tang and I wanted to go to the history of the word map and user ideas and bring it all together with the big idea. Then we have the meta and all that. But to the point of the survey, right, where we had the to get stakeholder alignment. So I was actually able to use this user story map and review it with Michel, and he was able to come in and say like, hey, I actually think we should have a survey. So survey wasn't even on there originally, but he thinks that it was a good idea to have that survey in there as well as the MVP and the GTM. So I would take this user story map and actually review it with all the stakeholders so that we can agree on the priority. So even though I have release 1 and 2 here, and release is kind of the first two sets of stickies here or boxes and rows here, it's not actually true that that has to be that way, that the first two pieces are actually the first two pieces of the story. They can actually be of the release. I actually don't put in a release part until very much later on. And so you can actually kind of draw, it might end up becoming like a squiggly line in here about what actually ends up becoming in release 1. But the point is that you take this user story map and it is a visual representation of what people will get, and that you can have people move around the stickies as they feel as they're important, and you can move them around as you gain more information talking to stakeholders is what you feel is important or what has to be done. And that allows you to be able to prioritize in a way that you can actually see how it's going to happen. So once we kind of understood this and understood like what we're going to have in the presentation, essentially you get the MVP document, which is essentially, what you guys are seeing now is the MVP. But what I would do in a normal product is we would have a presentation of every step in a PowerPoint, UI screens where they're applicable, details of each feature step, and a list of excluded features and reasoning. And this is really helpful to be able to share with stakeholders. And Michel will get into this as we go into some of the real world examples. But it's really helpful in explaining like what are you going to get in each part of the product and each release of the product, and it helps understand. So you can take basically the output of this to create an MVP document and share that information with stakeholders and understand that. Now, understanding the time is where you can get kind of an estimate for each one of these pieces, but Michel will talk about that in more detail as well. So let's go into this. So now, how do we relate this all back to marketing? So this is actually my post on LinkedIn a while back. And so once the user story mapping was ready, I was able to take the pieces specifically of the user story map and put them in my post so that they're marketed and show you can see that, oh, we're going to talk about the history of user story mapping. We're going to talk about minimal viable product, go to market, and we're going to review real world examples. So in this way, you can leverage the pieces and understand what's going to be coming in a release kind of visually and be able to leverage that to help coordinate your marketing. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Michel so he can talk through some real world examples.
Thanks, Ashish. Just 1 second as I share. Hope you can see my screen.
We can't see it yet, Michel.
Oh.
It should be working. Oh, he fell out. I'm going to let him back in, I guess, since he's presenting.
Probably a good idea. If he can't
It's
share,
a lot easier that way.
Sorry about
I have
that.
the slides too. If you
Yeah.
okay,
There it goes.
now we see it. We
Can
see
you
it.
see my screen now?
Yep,
Yeah.
we got it.
Awesome. You can see use case, is that correct?
Yes.
Awesome. So yeah, sorry about that. As I shared the screen, it kicked me off of the presentation. So yeah, I'm gonna share with you an example that we were working on, and it's fairly getting really into the details and really tactical steps that we took to kind of put this user story mapping, and bring it to life. So before we get started, just want to clarify a few concepts. So this is an application that sits in an open operating system that we call Omni. And Omni's goal is to help marketeers orchestrate better outcomes. So this application specifically is called Audience Explorer Omni. And what we do with this application is we use it to build the best possible audiences in terms of scale and accuracy across millions of data points. And as we have this application, we wanted to think about how can we enhance the audience building experience and kind of redesign it to better suit our user needs. And so what I'll be focusing on is how we used user story mapping in that specific redesign of the audience building experience. So here you can see just a brief screenshot of part of the application. This is the part that we call the Insights dashboard, just to give you an idea of kind of different data sources that we have. So let's get to the user story map. First, we have the user activity. So user activity, it's really important. This is maybe one of the most important steps because these things are the activities that the user is going to need to achieve, irrespective of what comes in the future, sections. So in the case of audience building, we're looking at setting up an audience build, define the audience definition, and then exit the audience definition builder, right? And so it's very important to make sure that these are not, features, but they are rather what we want the user to achieve, irrespective of the route to take, right? Again, as Ashish was saying, right, there are multiple routes. We want to make sure here that this is just the destination. And so, the second step is we take a look at the user tasks and we say, what are the things that are going to allow us to achieve that user activity? And, typically if you're like in our case, the user tasks were the tasks that how the user was interacting with the application that we already had live, right? But if you have a brand new experience, you could potentially, think of the user tasks in maybe a more abstract way. But for us, it was really important to kind of break down all those granular steps and how the user today is achieving that activity, right? And so ultimately, we then get into the user stories, right? And so the user stories here, this is probably, where we start to get into the real value of user story mapping, because we have the stages set for the user activities, for the user tasks, and now we start to brainstorm what are the user stories that are going to help us achieve these objectives or user activities, right? And so you can brainstorm with a different team of folks, whether it can be, your stakeholders, the design team, engineering, etc. And then you can kind of get an idea as well, right, of all the realm of possibility for the user stories. And in this case, I've kind of simplified it quite a bit for this presentation. Our kind of master user story map is much larger, but it shows you the concept of this is an unorganized kind of brainstorm, right, in the process. And then suddenly, we start to identify there may be certain patterns, certain features that we want to, focus on. And then, after much discussion, we kind of look into, okay, how can we organize these in kind of a release format, right? And so we start to think of releases not just as, what is the lowest level of effort, right? But more so, what is going to be the most value for the user, and how can we make that so that we have goal-based releases? So in this case, we identified that, before we even think of all the bells and whistles and enhance the user experience, we need to make sure that that base audience build, right, that critical kind of series of steps that the user has to go through, that we include that in our release, right? So we need to make sure that base audience build is there. And so we define that base audience build, with our definition, it can be subjective, but we make sure to define it. And we identified that, attribute search is going to be what's the most relevant feature to add here. And if you take a look at under user tasks, you'll see that the third box says here, select data source to create criteria group. And suddenly now we're saying in that first release, we're talking about attribute search, right? So we're no longer talking about selections. And the only reason that, we start to have these kind of organic connections come up in the user story map, because we're focusing, when we were brainstorming on the user stories, we're focusing on those user activities, right? And how they kind of relate across the board. So in that first release, base audience build with attribute search, and we have that scope defined. We built that scope, and what's the second release going to be? Second release is going to be some of those features that potentially are not in that base audience build, right, but are still going to give the user some incremental value. And finally, in release 3 and 4 is much more advanced features. But I want to note here that the power of kind of the scheduling the releases this way and making it so that it's goal-based is you can see that release 3 is smarter search, right? So we're introducing search in release 1, and then we're saying in release 3, we're going to do smarter search. And the reason for that is, right, we have the time to talk to users, gather analytics, try to understand, what does user behavior look like with our new attribute search in that first release. And then we've kind of phased it out in the third release to rework that search to make it better, etc. But at this point, our user story map is in a great state for us to start talking to stakeholders, right? We can take this actual user story map and say to stakeholders, these are the kinds of user stories and features that are going to be included in every release. Or we can, use this to, kind of summarize and go back to stakeholders, right? So it allows us to really set the right expectations with the teams that go to market, that help with the go to market. And more so, one benefit that I found is having this kind of structured approach to releases has helped to identify earlier on some users that we may want to get feedback from. And that can also include, some candidates that you may want to include in any kind of user acceptance testing that you may want to do. So you get to see the connections in a really, kind of clear way. And finally, once you have this map, you have your next steps for what the development cycle is going to look like. If it's applicable, you want to make sure to revisit your designs, right? And so in our case, we had a significant front end component that we were developing, and so we had to go back into our original designs and kind of strip out some of the features and adapt the design to fit each release, right? And that allows us to have a visual component to every release as well. So here, if you look at the left-hand side, this is our original design with a multitude of features. That piece I was talking about on attribute search is that, drop-down mega menu modal. And it allows you to use keywords to search across, our millions of data points and select different attributes. And in the right-hand side, we've ultimately said, actually, the core feature here is just searching. So let's get rid of a bunch of other things and just get that right first, right? And so that's what we ultimately have in that, final iteration.
Hey, Michel, we only got about a minute left. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, perfect time. I'll just pass it back to Ashish.
Okay.
Boy, Ashish, I think you're on
You're
mute.
still muted.
All right. Hey, I just had a couple of pieces here about the kind of pitfalls to avoid, and I'm just going to just really scan through them real quickly. Dividing into too many user tasks, going in rows rather than columns, and then really the last one here is kind of the most important, is that your stakeholders kind of have to understand that you're in iterative releases. So that, that's part of the thing here. Is I know sometimes you'll get a whole budget for a full project, and making them understand that you're getting it in chunks, can be a little bit of something that you need to do. And then finally, some resources. Teresa Torres, I think, is, really a good thought leader in product, and I love her book. And then Anna Kaylee has some more kind of mechanics of user story mapping that you can look at. And then, finally, if you guys want to talk to us, here's our LinkedIn. We're happy to talk to you guys more about user story mapping or Wu-Tang Clan, if you like.